So the first session this morning, I offered you the image of the sliver of light, discipleship along the Moonlit path. And for our time earlier, I tried to offer you images of what the journey we're on looks like. Okay? Whether that was for you Holy Saturday, whether it was the Grace Margin, whether it was the crossover space, whether it was the Moonlit path. Okay? Hopefully one of those images spoke to you. Or they precipitated you having another image revealed to you that fit more closely to your own feeling, to your own experience. All right? So as we move through this time then, I encourage you to carry that image with you. I'm going to be focusing for this session on what I call commitment to the Moonlit path. And in the questions that I gave you for sharing, I began to hint at what commitment to this Moonlit path looks like. And I'm going to say up front, from my own reading, my own reflect, it is the commitment to remain. And we're going to look at that remaining from the call to discipleship. All right? We are in religious life. We came to religious life to follow Christ, to live the gospel, to be disciples. So what does that look like for us at the time in which we find ourselves? All right? And then this afternoon, again, I will look with you at the scripture. Those three women, Mary, Elizabeth, and Anna. My methodology here is always to invite you to be with your own experience. What is your life experience right now? Okay? And now I'm going to look with you at the broader context in terms of where religious life is, where people who are writing about religious life tell us it is. All right, I offered you images, now I'm going to offer you, I hope, a little more concrete information. All right, so I want to use the 3 stages of discipleship that Ron Rolheiser offers across his books, Holy Longing and Sacred Fire. In his book, Holy Longing, he talks about what he calls essential discipleship. And that's the focus of that book. And he describes essential discipleship as the struggle to get our life together. And he says chronologically, this is the time between puberty and vocational choice. I'm going to offer you a wider perspective on that, okay? But that's his first stage, as he says. Then in Sacred Fire, he talks about what he calls mature or generative discipleship. Right? So once I get my life together, then I need to figure out how to give it away. And he says that giving away moves from the time I make some vocational choice, whether it's marriage, it's religious life, it's a certain career, and I devote myself entirely to that, to my retirement years, whatever that looks like. Now, I have to laugh immediately because who in religious life ever retires? You get my drift, okay? There is no, well, for us anyway, no retirement age, per se. But anyway. Then he keeps saying that he's going to write a 3rd book. It hasn't come yet. But at the end of Sacred Fire, he offers an epilogue on what he calls radical discipleship. Okay? And this, he says, is the effort we make, the struggle we make to give our death away. To give our death away. In terms of legacy. In terms of what has made meaning for my life and how do I want to leave that meaningfulness that I've made of my life behind. I'm going to talk more about each of these. All right? So, We get our life together, we give our life away, we give our death away. Okay? And in this process, we continue to follow Christ. And we continue, hopefully, to be open to the process of ongoing transformation. Now, of course, sisters, as I said to you, he's written whole books on this. He's one of my go-to guys, Ron Mulheiser. So I'm not doing justice, you understand? I'm not doing any justice to what he's written. Okay, I'm giving you just a window that I'm finding useful for my own life and for my own reflection. All right, I'm going to look at these now in terms of what this means for women. Okay? How does the fact that we are women perhaps nuance this more generic framework of stages of discipleship? Now, you may know this, but the phases in a woman's life move month by month, right? They move month by month, physically. Okay? Now, most of us are past our menstrual time, okay? But when we were there, we were very aware of the movement of the month. And the movement of the month is the movement of the moon. The movement of the month is the movement of the moon. So in ancient cultures, they talked about the movement of the moon and how it impacted the phases of a woman's life. Okay? So they set up what was called the maiden phase, the waxing moon, the growing moon. Okay? And I would offer this is an image of what Ron Mulheiser calls essential discipleship. Okay? We're in the maiden phase of our life. Then we come to the full moon, you know, as the moon continues to wax, come to fullness. We come to what ancient cultures would call the mother phase, the phase of the full moon. All right? Of course, you see in the image of a full moon, the image of the fullness of a womb, W-O-M-B. Okay? Women are pregnant with life. So the maiden phase then is the time up until a woman begins her menstrual cycle. Up until that time, she's not capable of birthing, you see? But once that cycle begins, then she has a fullness. She has a potential to give life, to be generative. Okay? And that phase runs until, chronologically, we come to what we call what? Menopause. Menopause. Most of us, I think, in here have survived that, have we? In one way or another, right? And then we come to what ancient cultures would call the crone phase. You may have done reading on this. I prefer to use the term matriarch because crone has a whole bunch of very negative connotations, all right? So I prefer to call the phase then after, look at Jean over there, she's still right in the middle there. Come to the matriarch phase after menopause. It is the time of the waning moon. And in terms of Ron Mulheiser, it will be the time of radical discipleship. Radical discipleship. Now I want to look at each of these briefly, okay? And see what they have to say to us about the time in which we find ourselves individually and as congregations. Because these phases are not only chronological, they are symbolic as well. Okay? So, okay, so the maiden phase then is the phase of awakening. Ron Mulheiser says it is a time when we learn how to love ourselves. Those of you who worked with teenagers, taught them in high school, what's their big thing? Identity, right? They're coming to try to figure out who they are. Now, I was just saying to the sisters, I love this work, you know, I wish I had done it 30 years ago. However, I finally know what I wanted to be when I grow up. You know what I mean? And what am I? I'm 72. Okay, so at 60 I figured it out. You see? So this is an ongoing process. It's not stuck in a chronology. We are always trying to discover who we are. what St. Francis says, what? There are only two questions in the spiritual life. Who are you, O God, and who am I? You're saying that's an ongoing discovery. All right. So, Ron Molheiser says, this is the time when we discover our potential. Okay? And we are always moving to realize potential. Father Andre Serena, that I've done pilgrimages with, he gives a talk on Mary and talks about what it means to be a virgin. And he says a virgin is a woman who is filled with potential. It has nothing to do with physical virginity. It's keeping that empty space in myself so that God can fill it, that whatever God wants to work in me can be realized, right? So at the time of essential discipleship then, I am discerning, how to get my life together. In spiritual language, we're discerning our call. Now, you are discerning, right? Some of you may be discerning when to, you need to move to assisted living or whatever, right? So discerning is not relegated to chronology. See, when I'm 16 years old, okay? It is a lifelong process. So there are times in my life when I am always in this place of the waxing moon. I think of, you may know Killian MacDonald. He's a Benedictine. I live with the poets, Anyway, this man, I would love to meet him, but I haven't. He taught Greek and Latin at St. John's University in Collegeville, seminary. Spent his whole life teaching Greek and Latin. 75, he retires. I'm looking at somebody who's shaking her head. 75, he retires and does what he wanted to do when he grew up, which was to be a poet. He has now published like 3 or 4 volumes of poetry, one more beautiful than the other. All right? So at 75, he was in his maiden phase. Do you see what I'm saying? He was discovering that potential in himself that he always knew was there, but never had a chance to realize. All right? So think of yourself now. See, what do you want to be when you grow up? It doesn't matter if you're 80. Do you see? All right? See, it's the what next question for me. It's the what next question. The mother phase is a phase of abundance. It is learning to love others. If I don't love myself, can I really love anybody else in any kind of gratuitous way? Of course not. Of course not. All right? So it's the phase of fullness. It's the phase of abundance. Okay? It's the phase of the full moon, and it's the phase of the middle time. Okay? But the middle time, the middle space for women, physically, is the time of abundance and fruitfulness. Now, hear the paradox of that in terms of the middle space I talked about earlier. Do you hear the paradox of that? The middle space is a space of darkness, see? But it's holy darkness, see? It's the darkness of the womb. All life comes from a dark womb. Does it not? All human life. All human life has to come from that middle, dark, empty, mysterious place. Okay? It is a place of fullness, even though it feels empty. This is the paradox of the Paschal Mystery. This is the paradox of the Gospel. So Ron Molheiser says in this time of abundance, we accept responsibility. My life is for my children. Mothers, think of your own mother. Everything is for the other. Everything is for the children. The mother carries a child for 9 months, right, with unconditional love, and everything is for that child. Right? So this is the time of mature discipleship. This is the time when I'm choosing how to serve. So I was talking to the sisters here at the break. Sister Audrey was saying, we're trying to discover now, how do we serve now? See, that's an ongoing question for us. Again, it doesn't matter if I'm 70, 80, I'm still always asking, how can I be of service? What does that mean for me? What does it mean for the congregation? Okay? Given the fact that we have closed schools, hospitals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right? So what does service look like now? Hey, I'm not caring for a patient. I'm not teaching the 3rd grade. So how do I channel my desire to serve? Where can I offer abundance? The matriarch phase is the phase of abandonment. Oh boy, oh boy. Now here we come. Okay? This is the time chronologically of the later years, you see, when I'm not encumbered by trying to figure out who I am. I know who I am, hopefully. All right? I'm not trying to figure out how I serve. I've served, see, and I will continue to find ways to serve. Now I have time for God. But this is the time of the waning moon. This is the time of the sliver of light. That's why I titled, this is the time that, if you remember nothing from today, just remember the sliver of light. This is the time of the sliver of light. This is the time of the waning moon. All right? This is the time for faith, as David White described it in that poem that I gave you. As Pope Francis talks about, seeing my reality with the eyes of Christ. This is a time for sharing wisdom. Don't we talk about that? Our wisdom women. Haven't we talked about the wisdom women of the past? Guess what? We're it. We're the wisdom women. All right? And this is part of the abundance. This is part of the way we are now to serve, you see, by sharing wisdom. Okay? This is the time of radical discipleship. This is the time of speaking prophetically. And that's what I'm going to focus on. All right? This is the time, as Ron Rolheiser says, to figure out how to give my death away. How to make it meaningful. You remember that wonderful book, or maybe you saw it on TV, Tuesdays with Maury. Right? That wonderful Jack Lemmon, fabulous performance and wonderful book, right? Those weekly meetings with Mitch Albom, the author, right? And sharing what he learned about life. You know, death ends a life, not a relationship. He says, death ends a life, not a relationship, all right? So this is the time, Ron Rolheiser says, of radical discipleship. The time to speak prophetically. The time to have the freedom to say what is true and know I have nothing to lose. I was with the congregation of the Humility of Mary Sisters, giving a retreat. This was 2 weeks ago. So I'm sitting at table. The sister who got me to come, she said, I want you to sit with Sister Cecilia. She's 100 years old. She's coming to the retreat. Imagine, listen to me. 100 years old. So I'm sitting with Sister Cecilia, who couldn't hear and who couldn't see. But anyway, so I'm shouting. So we have this conversation. Toward the end of the meal, she says to me, he goes like this, you don't sound like a preacher. I'm going to have to see what you do, she says to me. I said to her, I'll be glad to know at the end what you think. You know, but she was like right out there. Do you know what I mean? Right? The beautiful freedom. Beautiful freedom. So hopefully when we speak the truth, we speak the truth in love. Yeah, that's not easy. But it is the time for radical discipleship. Age gives us a freedom. It gives us a freedom. I used to say about my mother, you know, Mom, don't be subtle. Tell us how you really feel. You know, she was always like right out there. No filter. No filter. You know, now when you're 30, you need to have a filter. You know, by the time you're 90 or 100, believe me, okay, you're entitled. All right. So, we are called now, at this time then, to remain committed to this path. To the path that is ongoing, to the path that is cyclical, to the path that says sometimes we're trying to get our life together. Sometimes we're trying to find out how to give our life away. And sometimes we're trying to find out how to give our death away. Personally and congregationally, we're moving in cycles through these phases. And we need to be aware. of what we're being called to in terms of discipleship. Okay? Wherever we find ourselves and wherever we find the congregation, we are called at this time, as Nancy Schreck said, as I quoted this morning, to a theology and a spirituality of remaining. Now, hear this. So I want to, with the time we have remaining, no pun intended, I want to look at remaining. Again, I turn to Nancy Schreck. She says, we are a remnant. We meaning our congregations, and those of us who are members. Okay? And we are called to speak a message of hope. What God creates among the people is a remnant. You know Nancy Schreck, she's a biblical girl. That's her background, right? Okay. What God creates among the people is a remnant. Now think of you, think of your congregation. Their prophetic task was to articulate hope, the prospect of a fresh historical possibility assured by God's good governance of the future, even when the vision of what that will look like is not clear. So this is our work now in religious life, to remain holding the radical dream of Jesus for our world. To remain holding the radical dream of Jesus for our world. What is the radical dream of Jesus? It is to establish the reign of God. It is to establish the reign of God. We are not now building schools or hospitals. In fact, we are tearing lots of things down. Right? Okay. But we are called to hold the radical dream of Jesus for our world, which is to establish the kingdom, the reign of God, which has nothing to do with buildings of any sort. So I want to look with you now at what this remaining means. I'm going to turn to the Gospel of John, and you are very familiar with this passage, John 15, 1 to 17, the vine and the branches. Okay, it is the parable of the vine and the branches. In that text, in those 17 verses, John uses the word remain 11 times. 11 times. In the Gospel, he uses it 40 times. 40 times, remain. It means to abide. It means to live. It means to stay. It means to endure. And it means to hold on to. It is a powerful word. I asked you in your conversation, what's the feel of remaining for you? Initially, the word remain may carry the sense of being stuck. Being stuck. Okay? Like remain in your seat. Whoa. Yeah. Don't move in space. Okay? You're stuck. Do you see what I'm? But that is not the biblical meaning of remain. Okay? So when Nancy Schreck says we are called to hold the radical dream of Jesus for our world, to remain in that holding place. Okay. This is what some of what she is talking about. Now again, sisters, I'm not doing justice to this. Yeah, okay? I'm just trying to pull out what I hope will be connecting in a meaningful way for you. Okay. So I want to look at this word now, remain, as we understand it in English. Okay, what does the word remain mean? Because it is not just a play on words for me to say the remnant remains. The remains is what I'm saying. Right? Because remain is a verb and it's also a noun. See, as an English teacher, I love playing around with this kind of stuff. I hope you find it meaningful. So I'm going to look at the word remain. You and I, we are the remains. We are the remnant. We are like those who are left behind after Jesus has died. Now, I'm going to, I hope I say this in a reverent way, I'm going to use the death of Jesus as an image of the dying of the form of religious life that we have known. I want to emphasize that. The form is dying, not religious life. Okay? So, now think of the congregation you enter. Okay? We are the remains, we are the remnant. Okay? We are those who are left behind as the form of religious life that we have known is dying. And we have chosen, I told you I entered with 65. There were 10 at Golden Jubilee. All right? Everybody in this room has chosen to still remain, even as this dying is taking place. Okay? I am the remains, and I make a choice to remain. Okay, I make a choice to remain and endure and survive. And I remain, now hear this, in this place at this time, and my task is to witness to what remains, to hold the remnant of the dream of the gospel for the world. That's what we're holding on to. That's what we're abiding in. That's where we're remaining. That's where we're staying. Holding. Not only in our hand, but in our very flesh, we give witness to what the gospel means. Should I go back there? Okay. Now, in the Gospel of John, and you'll hear this at Easter, when we come to the end, when Jesus is just about to die, John says, when Jesus had taken the wine, he said, "It is finished." And bowing his head, he handed over his spirit. This is a critical phase in the Gospel of John. Now, you know the Gospel of John, right? In the Gospel of John, unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is God. Jesus is God, right? Jesus is in control, and he's in control in the movement of his passion and death. Okay? So notice John says he handed over the Spirit. Now, if you have ever sat at the bedside of someone who is dying, bring that back to your memory. Okay? I sat with my mother, I mentioned that to you. Okay? A person who is dying will take one last deep breath and then will exhale. This is true of Jesus. This is true of everyone who passes from this life. Okay? I take in one deep breath, my last, and then I exhale it. Shelley Rambo, in her book, Spirit and Trauma, the Theology of Remaining. Shelley Rambo, she talks it. It's a heavy, heavy-duty theological text, but if you can plow through it, it's worth it. Right? She says that when that breath enters the atmosphere, it remains forever. That dying breath of each of us, the dying breath of Jesus, is exhaled into the That's our legacy. That's the legacy of Jesus. Okay? Now this breath of Jesus goes into the air, before the Spirit comes. But this is equally the breath of the Spirit of Jesus, but not the breath of the risen Jesus, the risen Christ, that comes on Pentecost, right? Okay? So, between the death of Jesus and his being raised up is this middle space where the breath of Jesus is in the world, and guess who holds it? Those who witnessed his death. You with me? So, the remains, now I'm not playing around with these words. I'm playing around with it, but I'm not. The remains of the breath of Jesus remain in those who remain. The breath of Jesus remains in us, in those who witnessed his dying, the disciples, whoever was there. Right? It is the same for the dying of the congregation, or this form of life. Okay? You and I are standing under the cross of the congregation. Okay? And we are trying to hold on to the breath of what? The charism. What is the charism? It's the breath of the Spirit enfleshed in the life of the congregation. Okay? So whatever happens to the form of life of the congregation, which we are not going to see, you and I are commissioned to hold that breath until it's raised up, in whatever new form it's going to be raised up in. So if we look at the Triduum experience, on Good Friday, what happens to Jesus? He exhales his last breath, and the disciples who are there receive it. It goes into the air. It goes into the air. And on Holy Saturday, in the middle space, as Nancy Schreck calls it, in that interim time, now think of that, they don't know he's going to be raised up. They are carrying that breath. And what's happening to it? It's being integrated in their own breath. Do you see? Because when somebody dies and puts that breath in the air, I'm breathing it back in. Do you see? And it's being integrated as part of me. So it's not just me now. It's not just my spirit that I'm carrying. I'm carrying the Spirit of Jesus. I'm carrying the spirit of my charism. So that when Easter Sunday comes, when the Spirit of Jesus is, for one, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of the risen Christ, okay, that breath remains and becomes the Spirit of the risen Lord. Right? This is true of the journey of the congregation, wherever your congregation finds itself. You and I are there breathing in the spirit of the charism, okay? Not the form of life. Do you understand? Not the form of Jesus is dead. The form, the body, he's dead. Okay? But the breath that he exhaled is alive. Our charisms are alive. And we are commissioned to keep breathing them in deeply and keep exhaling them into the world. The charism. Until the new form of religious life, whatever it is, rises up and encases and fleshes that charism in some new form. I cannot tell you how this has comforted me. Okay? And where we find ourselves right now, we're coming up to the Triduum, sisters. I encourage you to reflect on this. I can only tell you how powerful a comfort it has been for me. And a challenge. And a challenge as well. All right? So, whatever charism my congregation carried, it is the power of the Spirit of Jesus. Again, this is Shelley Rambo. The Spirit of Jesus does not expire. Okay, he breathes his last, but that breath, in the way I've been describing it to you, that breath remains. Okay? This middle space, the Spirit remains in those who remain and who witness to what remains. They, that's us, we remain holding the divine breath of love, the release of Jesus' breath, our particular charism, his spirit of love, a love that is stronger than death. You know the beautiful Song of Songs, right? Deep waters can't quench love. Floods can't sweep it away. It is a love that is stronger than death. Okay? It is the spirit of the charism that we are commissioned to carry and walk with it along the path in which we find ourselves. Okay? This is a challenging place, sisters. It's a very challenging place. Okay? Because the way our charisms are going to be enfleshed in the future. Okay? I'll look there over at Gina. The way it's going to be very, very different. Okay? But it is our responsibility. It is our responsibility. It is our holy task to make sure whatever is happening around us, that we continue to breathe in the charism, okay, and exhale it into the world in which we find ourselves, whatever that is going to look like. We owe it to the genus, to the few that may follow us. Okay? It's our responsibility to hold it. Okay? Our hope is there. Our hope is in the dying breath of Jesus. That we breathe it in and we breathe it out until resurrection comes. My guess is we have a long Holy Saturday ahead of us. You with me? We have a long Holy Saturday ahead of us. Some of us are still at the dying bedside. Some of us are in Holy Saturday. Okay? So wherever we find ourselves, okay, remember, we do not have the charism, the congregation. The charism has the congregation. And it's up to us. So, what then is our call at this time? Okay, our call is to witness. Okay, to be prophetic, to speak the truth, to share our wisdom. Okay, I'm going to talk more about this after lunch. Okay, in terms of what we're called to in the scriptures. What does the prophetic call look like at this time in which we find ourselves? Okay. Again, the theological territory of remaining, okay, which is where we find ourselves, calls for a theology of witness. Okay? So, if I look at the sense of discipleship, what am I discerning? See, in that mating place, in that place of essential discipleship, what am I discerning? I'm discerning how to witness. In that mother phase, in that place of abundance, in that time of generative discipleship, what am I trying to generate? What kind of life am I trying to bring? I'm trying to bring witness. And of course, in that matriarch faith, I am witnessing to what I have learned on the journey, to the wisdom, not knowledge, sisters, not knowledge. You know, the wisdom that is, what can I say? Knowledge brought to prayer, knowledge brought to contemplation, that kind of wisdom, right? So, we talk about then the witness of discipleship. What does it mean to be faithful to following Jesus at this time? What's it mean for me? What's it mean for my congregation? And how important it is that we have one another as we journey. We're going to talk more about this afternoon. That we continue to love one another. And I don't know what your experience is, but the smaller we get in numbers, I hope this isn't offensive, the less we can avoid one another. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, the smaller we get, we can't get lost in the numbers. See? Yeah. That's has an upside and has a downside. Do you follow what I mean? So the challenge, it's a challenge sometimes to love one another. And because we've known one another for so long, you know, we know one another. You know, familiarity breeds a lot of things. Do you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying, right? Like you go to a meeting and chapters, oh God help us all, chapters, and Sister so-and-so stands up and I say to myself, oh, there she goes. We've been hearing this song for 25 years. I don't say that out loud. You understand what I mean? So, you know, how do we open ourselves that, you know, how do we, I always say assume goodness, that we're all on the journey. So, you know, because I knew you 30 years ago, I can't keep you in that box. You know, a lot has happened to you in 30 years, you know? So I need to, just like I want you to allow that a lot has happened to me in 30 years. And I'm not, in some ways I'm the same person, but in other ways I'm not the same person. So it's very challenging for us to love one another. And to continue to witness to obedience. By that I mean the root meaning of the word. That is to listen to give an ear to. Okay? I'm constantly in that discerning place, you see? I may feel like a matriarch. You know, my body feels like a matriarch, but I'm called to this maiden place of always listening, discerning. See, what is God asking of us now? Okay? What is the phrase we use, what? The will of God for us now. See? What's the will of God? Colossians or Ephesians tells us what? The fullness of life in Christ. That's the will of God. Gospel of John, what? I've come that you might have life and have it to the full. What does fullness of life mean in a time of diminishment? Do you hear the paradox of that, sisters? Okay? There's diminishment all around us. So, what does fullness mean in that context? Fullness of life. It's got to mean something different. It's not going to mean opening another school or another, probably not going to mean that. It may. It may. And can we do all this? Can we keep breathing in the charism with joy? Sometimes, you know, on some days, man, oh man, doesn't seem to be a lot of joy around. Right? But how can I continue? Not joy that's happiness, you know? Oh, goody gumdrop, everything's, you know, peachy keen here in my world. No. But the joy that comes from, again, it's John 15. You know, I've told you all this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full. Right? So what does this mean for us at this time in which we find ourselves? Okay. So the invitation then, the commitment to this path we're on is a commitment to remain. But the remaining does not mean I'm standing in this place on the path. The remaining is a dynamic movement. but it is a movement that is, for the most part, interior. It is the movement of inhaling the breath of Jesus, the breath of the charism, integrating it with who I am, with my own breath, and then breathing it out into the world in which I find myself. Right? This is an interior task. This is, I don't mean the word task, it's a contemplative, it's a life lived in contemplative rhythm. Okay? So it is incumbent upon us, sisters, to be women of prayer, women of contemplation, because it's only from that space, that dark mystery of the womb in each of us, that new life is going to come. Okay? An expectant mother breathes for the new life that has not yet been born. Okay? So we are in that place of carrying whatever is the new life for the carrier. It's going to take more than 9 months. You see? But we are breathing for that life, whatever it is, whenever it's ready to come to birth. Paul says in the letter to Galatians, Galatians 4, the only time he mentions Mary, Galatians 4:4, what does he say? In the fullness of time, God sent his Son, born of a woman. In the fullness of time. We're not yet there. But until we get there, we are carrying and breathing for that life. And if we don't, it's not going to be born. So, this is our commitment. This is our discipleship. Okay? This is how we are to follow, for us as Franciscans, the poor and crucified Christ. Okay? And to keep his Spirit alive in our congregations, whatever form that Spirit takes, that we call the charism. Okay? So, you've been wonderful, and so I appreciate your attentiveness to me this morning and to one another as well.